Good day. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we have been reading the beautiful work, Everyday Holiness, the Jewish Spiritual Path of Mussar. And we've had exposure to this in the past when we read The Path of the Just by the Ramkel. But I think this book's breaking it down even more so. And yesterday we read chapters on equanimity, which is that calmness of mind, that calmness of soul, and contentment, and the benefits of contentment and fulfillment, and who is rich? One who is happy with what he has. And there's nothing more discontent than always being in want. And I'm sure the Torah definitely promotes us away from wantonness, for sure. And today we've got a beautiful topic. We're on chapter 15, and that is on enthusiasm, or zerizut in Hebrew. It says here, just do it enthusiastically, and this can be so infectious. Shalom, Sheila, glad to have you with us, and everybody else out there on Noahide World Center social media. It's a joy to be able to share, and we appreciate everybody that checks in, and it's just joy to be together and have a time of a reflection and study, and some of these personal traits is always something more we can integrate into our lives. So enthusiasm today so far. The angels were praised for this good trait of enthusiasm. As it is said regarding them in Psalm 103:20, they are mighty in energy, doing as he says, listening to the voice of his word. And as it is written in Ezekiel 1:14, the heavenly beings dash back and forth like lightning. In truth, human beings are just that, humans, and not angels. It is therefore impossible for us to have the might of the angels. Nonetheless, we should strive to get as close to this level as we possibly can. King David used to praise his own share of this trait by saying in Psalm 119:60, I hurried, did not delay to keep your commandments. And from the Path of the Just, that was quoted by the Ramkal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. So enthusiasm is it's infectious. It is one of the best motivators out there when people see that you're enthusiastic about what you hold to and what you live for. It is the best way to shine light, for sure. In traditional Mussar yeshivas, the talks given by the spiritual supervisors are sometimes called hisaris, meaning awakening. Rabbi Yisrael Yaakov Lubachansky, who delivered these talks at the Baranovich Yeshiva in the years leading up to its destruction in the Holocaust, was a master of the hisaris talk, usually delivered to about 500 people on Saturday night in total darkness. Wow. But there is another, hold on. But there is another sense or interpretation for this word, hisaris, and that is inspiration. The soul trait of enthusiasm or zeal carries the same sense of awakened energy. So, yeah, you can see the synonym there, or between between enthusiasm and inspiration. Motivation is as much a key to spiritual endeavor as any other activity. Meditation will have no impact if not done regularly. How can your prayer life have any effect if you seldom rouse yourself to pray with concentration and passion? It is just a fact that your soul traits will gradually fade from your field of vision when you don't recite a morning affirmation or keep an evening journal. If a person will not rouse himself, of what benefit are all the Mussar talks? Asked Rabbanu Yonah. Of course, motivation is only part of the picture. There are always to be very energetic. There are ways to be very energetic that still run you off the rails. A good head of steam, for example, is also potent for driving in the direction of evil. There is also the modern curse of frantic rushing. Which is a kind of headless enthusiasm. So think about it. Frantic rushing is a kind of headless enthusiasm. And this is what I find the Yetzer Hara pressures you. Make a decision now. Never giving you time to think, meditate, or to put any real thought into the matter. Always pushing you for a decision. And while we see the importance of being energetic and enthusiastic, even to the point of zealousness, there is no counsel to be rash and foolish, as Hesbon Hanefesh underlines. There are people whose process of deliberation is so short that it seems as if they conduct all their affairs solely according to the advice of their animal spirits. About them, the verse in Proverbs 21:5 states, "The thoughts of the zealous are superfluous, and those who are hasty reap only loss." So when your evil inclination is pushing you to make a quick decision, understand from Proverbs 21:5, you're only going to reap loss if you make hasty decisions. The warning the Mussar teachers give us is that rashness and frantic busyness are just as much impediments to the trait of enthusiasm as is slothful laziness. Think about it. You ever notice people in our day and age, they want to pretend they're busy? And I remember since cell phones have come out, how many people, if they don't want to listen to you, they just pretend they're on their phones. It's like slothful laziness. They're busy, busy, busy in their own agendas. And they're like battering rams that leave a wake of disaster. Might you recognize tendencies of your own in any of these obstacles to enthusiasm? So bear in mind that when we are considering the sole trait of enthusiasm, we're taking it as a given that there is a good moral compass in hand and that effective deliberation has taken place. Proper, positive, balanced enthusiasm is action done with a full throttle once review, consideration, and decision have set you on the right course. So what a definition. Proper, positive, balanced enthusiasm is action done with a full throttle once review, consideration, and decision have set you on the right course. Showing up is not enough. It's just too by rote. Judaism is a religion of commandments and actions, and its leaders and teachers have stressed the importance of enthusiasm because the proper way to execute the divine will is with energy and alacrity, or zirizut. However, recognition dawned long ago that it is almost impossible to do the same thing every day, more so several times a day, and not have those activities become dull and mechanical acts of mere obligation, where it's done by rote, just going through the motions. Anyone who has attended a prayer service that seems to have as its main purpose racing through the requisite words in the shortest possible time in order to get out of there knows exactly what he means. That is so far from the intention, in which every observance is a precious opportunity crafted with care to help us connect to the spiritual in such a way as to make a lasting impression on the soul. Because we get drugged into unconsciousness by repetition. Familiarity breeding contempt. I love the way he says drugged into unconsciousness by repetition. And lest they become dead acts, prayer and observance need to be regularly boosted with an infusion of enthusiasm. And what is true in your service to God is also true in your life in other ways. To live with spiritual integrity and authenticity requires that you break through the smothering curtain of routine. You'll do that by consciously ticking up your enthusiasm a notch. You must know, says the 16th century Mussar classic Orko Zadakim, that the trait of zeal is the foundation of all the traits. Wow. And later it adds, the trait of zeal is an ornament to all the other traits, and it perfects all of them. If you are going to be generous, how much better to give with enthusiasm. Acts of loving kindness should not be delayed, but rather done with alacrity. Be zealous in defense of the honor of your friend. These are examples of some traits among the many that gain an important dimension when they are enlivened with enthusiasm. So that's what enthusiasm does. It enlivens everything. The rabbis have found the basis for their teachings on enthusiastic action in the Torah's instruction on eating the Passover sacrificial lamb. The sacrifice is to be eaten quickly, and from this, the general principle is drawn that we should not delay in doing what is spiritually beneficial. When a mitzvah prevents itself, don't let it go stale. King David said himself, I was quick, I did not delay in keeping your commandments. The standard reason for not delaying is that you might let the opportunity slip away from you. Rabbi Shlomo Wolb explains, however, that a mitzvah delayed or done unenthusiastically is not a mitzvah that might go wrong, but one that already has gone wrong. It is a second-rate performance that has already been contaminated. Wow. Second-rate performance that has already been contaminated. The lesson for us here is that merely showing up in life isn't enough. Drifting along with no passion for living or repeating the same good acts in a routine way is a kind of sin. Your acts are contaminated. Whoa! Wait a second. Even a good deed, if it's repetitive and vain, it can be contaminated or a kind of sin. Would you have thought of delay or a lack of enthusiasm as factors that contaminate your actions? One student got this lesson in the most ordinary of contexts when she had to attend a meeting for one of her children. She approached the meeting with a negative attitude. I doubted it would be useful to me. I resented the time I would have to take to schlep back and forth, the interruption in my day, which is already packed. What snapped her out of her drift was her recognition that this meeting was for the benefit of her beloved child. How could she be so unenthusiastic when it might do him some good? I took a deep breath and thought of enthusiasm. To do this task was not enough. To show up was not enough. I needed to get into a different frame of mind, to think about my kid and the possibility that I might learn even one thing that would be a benefit. With those thoughts, something shifted in her. I no longer saw this task as an imposition, an interruption to my too busy day. This was worthwhile. This was a worthwhile thing to do. Hi, Patricia. Nice to have you with us. Quick and enduring. There are two different aspects of the trait of enthusiasm. The first is to be quick to take action. Our role model here is Abraham, who the Torah tells us rose early in the morning. He did that 3 times. Once to stand before Hashem's place, another time to expel Hagar and her son Ishmael from the household, and finally to fulfill the difficult commandment he had received to take his son Isaac to Mount Moriah to be sacrificed. His sense of service was so complete that he did not hesitate in the least to spring into action. When windows of opportunity, this is so key, when windows of opportunity open in your life, these may also be invitations from Hashem. Are you quick to recognize and act on the ones that are for the good? Because sometimes the doors shut, windows of opportunity close, and we miss that opportunity. The second aspect of enthusiasm involves finding and expressing the energy needed to complete a task. As important as it is to be quick off the mark, it is equally important to sustain energy throughout the whole enterprise. It's so common for people to begin something with a tank full of enthusiasm, only to grind to a halt when they hit delay or when some unforeseen obstruction arises. They get bored or something else gets in the way. It takes enthusiasm not to bog down, wander off, or pull up mid-course, but to press on to finish the good deed with vigor, which is what I try to do here on Rocky Mountain Readings with every book we read. But sometimes when I see low numbers, it's like, my enthusiasm gets in the toilet. Sad, but, I'm only human, so I try to stir it up to make sure we finish. But it seems that the audience doesn't like long books. But I don't like doing like we did that Yes to Life, and it was done in 3 days, and that is just too quick, I think, So I try to monitor that in my search now when I'm looking for a new book. How big is the book? With regard to this, the sages said, a mitzvah is judged only upon its completion. As much as we like to comfort ourselves otherwise, good intentions are not enough. Laziness subverts enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is one of those soul traits that is best cultivated by understanding and addressing what obstructs it. The natural tendency of the heart is to be passionate and energetic. So setting free that innate power is more a matter of removing impediments than stoking a fire. Nice way to put it. What is it that subverts and deflates your enthusiasm? The Ramchal offers his guidance in the path of the just. The first major stumbling block to enthusiasm he identifies is its direct opposite, which is laziness. When laziness rules the roost, not much of anything happens, except that we remain stuck in our present circumstances, arrested like a bud frozen on the limb. Laziness may seem benign, but the Ramchal warns us about how insidious and dangerous that trait can be. The bad trait that comes from laziness does not come about in one fell swoop, but slowly and without notice. It comes in a consequence of one bad deed after another until you find yourself sunk in evil. Without even recognizing that it is happening, laziness carries us lower and lower until we ultimately become agents of evil. The lazy man, though not actively evil, produces evil through his very inactivity. What Ramchal has to tell us about laziness that we may not realize is that laziness is characterized by heaviness. And see that the nature of the human being is very heavy. Like many Mussar teachers, he associates laziness with our physicality. If we were beings of pure spirit, we'd be light and active. But because we live in bodies, we are tied to the physical world. Controlled by the force of gravity, we are pulled down. These are realities over which we have no control, but Rabbi Luzzatto does point out what is under our influence. It is up to us whether we succumb to these forces or, alternatively, make an effort to lift ourselves up into enthusiasm. If you abandon yourself to this heaviness, you will not succeed in your quest, he concludes. The Hebrew word for heavy also shows up prominently in the story of Moses' attempts to get Pharaoh to release the children of Israel from Egypt. There we read that Pharaoh refused to pay attention to Moses' entreaties because his heart was literally heavy. Though the translation usually says obstinate or stubborn, here too we get an image that helps us understand what it is to be heavy. Like laziness, it means to run counter to the way of the Spirit. Wow. The power of rationalization. In a great stroke of irony, the Pharaoh accuses the Jews of being lazy from Exodus 5:8. We uncover here a feature of laziness that most of us will recognize all too readily. Laziness thrives on rationalization, for surely that is what the Pharaoh was doing, rationalizing his own weakness by attributing it to others. That's what happens. It starts to accuse because it wants to stay lazy. The Altar of Navarodoc has a poignant section in his book, Madrigat Ha'adam, in which he runs through a list of ambitions a person might set for himself, and he responds to each one with the words, if only. I'd give so much to charity. If only I were wealthy, I'd study and learn so much. If only I were smarter, I'd be so helpful to my friends. If only I were stronger. All of it is rationalization, of course, and nowhere do we find a rationalization more perfected than in the case of the lazy bones. A lazy person shines with brilliance in creating excuses for why he or she just cannot accomplish some task. King Solomon pithily captures this idea in the book of Proverbs. A lazy person considers himself wiser than 7 sages. Yeah. Though Orchot Zadakim was written in the 16th century, the picture of the rationalizing sluggard it presents still resonates 500 years later. In The Gate of Laziness, we read the following based on the sayings in the book of Proverbs. If one says to him, your teacher is in the city, go and learn Torah from him, he answers, I'm afraid of the lion on the road, as it is written in Proverbs 26:13. The lazy man says there is a lion in the way. If they say to him, your teacher is already in the province, get up and go to him, he answers, I'm afraid that a lion might be in the streets. As it is written, a lion is in the streets. If they say to him, he is lodging right near your house, he answers, the lion is right outside. As it is written, the lazy man says, there is a lion outside. I shall be slaughtered in the middle of the streets. If they say to him, he is in the building, he answers, and if I go and find the door locked, I will have to return. They say to him, it is open, but he still will not get up. As it is written, the door is swinging on its hinges, and the lazy man is on his bed. In the end, not knowing what to answer, he says to them, whether the door is open or locked, I want to sleep a little more. As it is written, how long will you sleep, you lazy man? When will you arise from your sleep? Here is rationalization exemplified. By clever argument, we justify giving into the heavy inertia that Ramchal has highlighted to us. That's why rationalization is called advice of the evil inclination. Wow. That's a statement. Rationalization is called advice of the evil inclination. And it's ultimately not only misleading, but destructive. Are you aware of the little voice that keeps you from being active and energetic in the cause of lifting yourself up? In Jewish thought, that whispering is the voice of your Yetzer Hara, the inborn adversary to your spiritual ascent. I like that definition. What convincing reason does it offer you to ensure that you stay stuck on the couch, not learning, not practicing, not exercising, not visiting the sick, not doing the myriad things that you yourself would certainly rank as worthwhile activities? If you would only do them. The Yetzer Hara counsels, why bother? You're so tired. There will be lots of others. This isn't the last chance. This is how that inner voice tries to keep you from doing that which is positive and leads you to do negativity. The Talmudic rabbis were well aware of how the Yetzer Hara operates. Today, the Yetzer Hara says, do this, or sin, and the next day he says, do this, more serious sin, until he says to him, serve idols, and he goes and he does it. The Yetzer Hara is masterful at deploying rationalizations as it leads you deeper and deeper into wrong actions. Sometimes rationalization justifies laziness. Other times it comes in the guise of careful and thoughtful deliberation, which paralyzes just as effectively. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Leffen exposes this tendency. There are people who are intelligent and quick in a certain field of learning or in a certain craft, but who lack ideas or experience in other fields. When faced with a situation with which they are unfamiliar, they think and reflect and ponder, and then they consult and think again interminably. This is one's virtue. This one's virtue is, in truth, one's problem. Because humans are intelligent, they can always find endless rationales that support different courses of action. Because of one's ability to reach a final decision, opportunity passes by or one delays an enterprise with one's hesitation for days or years, thus sacrificing their benefits for long periods of time. If you view small transgressions, even laziness itself, as serious as the Jewish tradition views idol worship, then you will find a source of inspiration to lift yourself up in enthusiasm. Dulled by the world, Ramchal points out to another common factor that can punch a hole in your inner life through which your energy can drain out. The propensity to dull ourselves with the pleasures of the world. If that was true in his time, how much more so in ours? The allures of today's world include so much that was inconceivable in previous centuries, from the useful, like cameras and computers, to the things we could still get by without, like junk food and luxury vehicles. Not only objects, but also comforts and pleasures are available in forms and to degrees that even the most prescient people of earlier generations could not have imagined. Oscar Wilde summed it up incisively. Comfort is the only thing our civilization can give us, he said. This thought captures a truth about our world, though any parent like me who has had a child's pneumonia cured by antibiotics will attest that the modern world offers other goods as well. The relentless, almost addictive pursuit of nifty things, comfort, and relaxation that is a mainstay of our civilization has never been an ingredient in anybody's recipe for a satisfied spiritual life. As consistent and self-evident as that may be, I have found that it is usually fruitless to suggest even to someone who is committed to their spiritual life that they step back from the soporific pleasures of society. Most of us are so used to our comforts and enjoy them so much that it's a little like trying to talk a kid away from a candy or a toy. The pursuit of comforts and pleasures depletes spiritual energy simply because we have only so much energy in our lives. We waste precious energy running after the shiny apple, and then we have nothing left for higher pursuits. Can you remember when new technology was called labor-saving devices? We've learned since then that having more technology does not save labor. It just speeds up the processes and raises expectations. Isn't that the truth? Yep, speeds up the processes and raises expectations to the point where people feel depleted if they don't have the latest tech. Can you see this at work in your own life? Do you get caught up in worldly activities that sap what energy you have, leaving less for spiritual endeavor? Don't worry, be enthusiastic. Laziness, excessive deliberation, rationalization, and pursuit of material pleasures all deplete enthusiasm. Before closing the list, Rabbi Luzzatto brings us one more factor to watch out for: anxiety. Worrying and fretting can also deplete spiritual energy. In fact, anxiety is often what underlies other things we do that sap our enthusiasm. After all, isn't it our fears and worries that send us searching after shelter from the real or imagined storm, the right into the arms of Madison Avenue and its commercial masters? Ramchal provides an accurate thumbnail description of our usual state of anxiety. At one point, you might be nervous about cold or heat. Another time, you might worry about accidents. Then another time about illness. And yet another time about the wind and so forth. Most of us can identify with this picture. And yet, who realizes that among all the costs of anxiety, we have to include a spiritual toll as well? And that's all we saw with this COVID crisis. Just, trying to put the full throttle on anxiety with people. We are not talking about worries that validly ought to concern us, like the world situation or things over which we have some control. Rabbi Luzzatto cites the Talmudic dictum: things are different where there is a possibility of danger. There is no end to subjects to fret over, real or imaginary. Rabbi Luzzatto points out the senseless concern when you compound one form of self-protection onto another, one fear or worry onto another. What he means is that you buy the house to protect yourself from the elements and then worry about the roof. So you put on a new roof at great expense, then you worry about the new roof, so you hire a company to apply a sealant, then you worry that they didn't give you the best chemicals or that it will wear off in one rainstorm, so you buy insurance on the sealant that protects the new roof on the house. You might recognize that kind of worried mind in someone you know, or maybe in yourself as well. One person prone to anxiety will worry about any product that it might not work, or it will break, or it's the wrong one, or no sooner have you gotten it home than the manufacturer will come out with a better one, or maybe a cheaper one, or one that has more functions, and so on and so on. This state of free-floating anxiety can dominate a life, fill it up, and see a person off to the grave never having really lived, because he or she was forever tied up in knots every minute of every day over what might be. At that extreme, of course, anxiety can be a psychiatric disorder best treated by professionals. But many of us relate to the world through a filter of anxiety that falls well short of psychiatric diagnosis, but still disables spiritual growth. You can be quite functional and still never realize anything near the measure of your soul potential in life just because of anxiety. Worry of the kind concerning us here is a posture. It isn't based on facts, but on attitude. Often, yeah. Subjective. The sooner we divest ourselves on our worrying stance, the better, because this way of seeing and receiving the world keeps us from truth. Corrosive anxiety reveals an overattachment to this world and its objects and conditions. What will those worries matter 5 years from now, or 10, or when you are in your final days, or laid to rest? It is valid and useful to recognize that you are just passing through. Against that backdrop, how important are those worries? And how many people pass those anxieties off as concern? I'm just trying to care for my stuff. Rabbi Luzzatto also counsels that recognizing Hashem's role in your life will help to counter anxiety when you have firm trust that whatever will be is just as it should be. Whatever will be is just as it should be, however you might evaluate it, good, bad, or otherwise. There will simply be no place in your heart for baseless anxiety. Knowing that you are sheltered under the wings of the divine quiets all tremors of the heart. How to cultivate enthusiasm. So, how should we stoke the fire of our enthusiasm? Simply saying to yourself, I want to burn like a Roman candle is about as likely to have the desired effect as saying, I want to be happy. Is it going to make you happy? This is a teaching of Rabbi Slanter. He says, it is insufficient for man to improve his general will to long for the good and to despise evil. That won't do it. But what will? Rabbi Slanter continues. But he must seek the means of correcting each individual trait of his soul. Come on. That's a tall order, but it is the one we are handed. Rabbi Luzzatto helps us focus in by pointing to one soul trait that, if cultivated, delivers up more energy and fewer hindrances to moving yourself in the direction of holiness. He tells us that we will do this by awakening to the very many good things that the Holy One, blessed be He, does for you moment by moment. In other words, practicing gratitude. Hard as it may be to see, good is undeniably flowing to you in every moment. Sometimes that outpouring is very apparent, like in those moments when you receive a wonderful and unexpected gift. In the early days of the Siva Foundation, we had a board meeting at which a number of very good projects were proposed. We had about $100,000 in the bank, and if we funded all the proposals, our account would be totally emptied. That didn't seem to be the prudent thing to do, but the group came up to a consensus that prudence wasn't the trait we wanted to strengthen at that moment, and so we gave away all the money we had. That very same day, a supporter phoned to offer a gift of, yes, $100,000, completely replenishing our well. It seemed perfectly clear to us that Hashem's goodness was flowing toward us in that moment. Most often, however, we are in a state of indifference towards the goodness in our lives. It's not that it isn't there. It's just that you may not be paying attention to it because you're working at this or trying to fix that or holding together some other thing. And as you struggle with one challenge or another, you've got your eyes fixed on the goal. Or maybe just the next step you need to execute. You don't pay attention to the good in most situations because you are focused on what needs improvement. It is also so easy to take for granted the ordinary goodness in our lives. For example, when you wake up in the morning, the chances are very good that you will find yourself in a warm, dry bed. For me, after 57 years of waking up almost every day in a warm, dry bed, somehow I just don't spring out of bed in the morning and exclaim, warm and dry again. It just doesn't happen, not because it isn't a gift to live in a secure, heated home, something the majority of the world's people do not experience today, let alone the even greater majority of the past, but because the recognition of that truth is dulled by the consistency. We become injured and don't feel gratitude for great beneficence that we simply cease to see as gifts. We take things for granted. I love how he mentioned earlier gratitude as being the clasp on an expensive set of pearls. And if you don't have gratitude, the pearls will fall off the string. And you need to consider how important and valuable whatever that gratitude is holding together, and connected to is very, very, very important. Hi, Zakia. Nice to have you with us. And sometimes, alas, it is very hard to see the good because it is overshadowed by pain and suffering. There is still good there in some form and quantity, but misery can screen our perception. A person with terminal cancer, for example, may have physical symptoms and existential pain that occupy the full screen of consciousness. That person may be attended by a loving spouse, children, friends, nurses, doctors, social workers, clergy, psychologists, nutritionists, orderlies, and so on, who daily or even hourly are delivering tremendous gifts of treatment and care. Though there may be little or even no inner space to recognize these gifts for what they are and feel gratitude, as anyone who's experienced physical pain can well understand and empathize with, they are gifts nonetheless. There are people who are in the midst of terrible illnesses or others suffering do find their way to be able to say thank you and to express the trait of recognizing the good. Good is always present. God is flowing gifts our way in every moment, if only the benefaction of being kept alive, and usually so much more. Even death can come as a gift. When the pain is beyond bearing, we need to awaken to feel gratitude for all we receive in this moment, and then in this moment, and then in this moment. Another perspective on this teaching focuses not on the gifts we receive at every moment, but rather on our moment-to-moment experience of gratitude for those gifts. This inspiration looks not at our awakening to the unending flow of gifts we can identify and appreciate, but rather invites us to be richly present in this moment with gratitude. You may already be well aware that you are grateful for specific gifts. You may be thoroughly convinced by argument and reason and experience that there is an outpouring of beneficence flowing into your life. But does your heart fill with the experience of gratitude in this moment? And can you sustain that experience into the next moment? This perspective addresses the problem that many of us have of seeing ourselves intellectually as being the recipients of gifts and wonders in theory, while in practice our every moment is not infused or maybe even tinged with the feeling of gratitude. What is the connection to the soul trait of enthusiasm? When you truly realize that you receive gifts every day, and when that recognition really penetrates, then you will be spurred into action to be of service and to do good and to make good of yourself, simply because it has become palpably clear to you that you are holding gifts in your hands. Living with awakened gratitude delivers fuel to make our actions more energetic. When you spark the flame that ignites the fire and so lift yourself out of the heavy lethargy or frantic worry that can paralyze your life, you will have begun the process that will build on itself. Ramkal put it this way. Just as enthusiasm can result from an inner burning, so it can create one. That is, one who perceives a quickening of his outer movements in the performance of a mitzvah conditions himself to experience a flaming inner movement through which longing and desire will continually grow. If, however, he is sluggish in the movements of his limbs, the movements of his spirits will die down and become extinguished. Experience testifies to this. Lazy bones go to the ant, study its ways, and learn. Without leaders, officers, or rulers, it lays up its stores during the summer, gathers its food at the harvest. How long will you lie there, lazy bones? When will you wake from your sleep? A bit more sleep, a bit more slumber, a bit more hugging yourself in bed, and poverty will come calling upon you and want like an armed soldier. And this was a verse I remember reading as a young man, and it just haunted me, always kept me going, motivated. You just never wanted to be in that position. Best to be a doer than be stuck in poverty because you're unwilling, you know. All right, so let's move on. Next chapter, silence, or shtika. Nothing is better than silence. The craft of a person in this world is to behave as if mute. The craft is not to be a babbler. This is something one has to learn. Since the baby knows to talk, he babbles as it pleases him. Silence needs to be learned because silence is a great skill. And by it, you recognize the person of intelligence. The nature of a person is his solitude. Only in that does the soul and spirit develop their strength. That was by Rabbi Shlomo Wolb from Alei Shur. Rabbi Yosef Yozel Hurwitz, or the Altar of Novarodok, as he is always called, was born in Lithuania in 1847. Just before the rabbi's marriage, his father-in-law died, and right after the marriage, the altar took his father-in-law's textile store and worked as a merchant. One day, as he rushed through the streets doing business in St. Petersburg, capital of Tsarist Russia, he ran into Rabbi Itzel Peterburger. "Where are you running, Rabbi Itzel?" asked the altar. "I'm going to my place of business," he replied. "A person must have a source of livelihood. A person must have from where to live." "I realize that," answered Rabbi Itzel, "but a person must also have from where to die." That piercing comment catalyzed the altar to redirect his life. By this time, he was already a widower and had decided to give up his business and devote his life to spiritual search. He arranged for his children's care and then entered a period of seclusion that lasted 2 years. He had himself bricked into a small room attached to the house of a benefactor. There was no door or exit. No one could enter or leave the room except by breaking through the wall. He communicated with the outside world by means of a bell or left messages by one of the 2 windows in his room. He prayed, studied Jewish law and Mussar, and looked deeply within himself in silence. He sought the quiet that is the soul's balm. Have you experienced the thick silence of a forest that penetrates to the marrow? Or the morning after a snowfall when stillness spreads an incomparable blanket on the muffled world? The night sky, no wind, the voluptuous silence of a becalmed sea, a mind released from chatter to stillness. The central statement of faith in Judaism is the Shema, which reads, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Only in silence is it possible to hear." Guarding the tongue, Rabbi Slanter, teacher of the altar of Novarodok, made silence the final of the 13 soul traits that he listed on his basic curriculum for Mussar practice. What he said about silence, however, lagged most of what we come upon in the Mussar literature on this subject, is actually more about restraint in speech than about silence itself, or about how contemplative quiet figures in the curriculum of the soul. In this chapter, we'll first explore teachings about careful speech and then look at what Mussar masters have to say about contemplative silence. Orkot Zadakim advises, if you cannot find someone to teach you Mussar, remain silent, lest you speak foolishness. Predictably, and most important, the interpersonal dimension of silence gets most of the attention of the Mussar masters. They drew on older sources. There is a time to be silent and a time to speak, wrote King Solomon in Ecclesiastes. In the book of Job, after listening to his so-called friends trying to comfort him, Job finally erupts with, "Be silent and I will teach you wisdom." In silence, wisdom is wisdom, too. A wise person, therefore, is one who knows what to say and when to say it, but also knows when to keep silent. And even a fool is judged wise just because he keeps silent. Jewish thought and practice is very concerned with the right use of speech because it recognizes that, like any powerful resource, speech can be both creative and healing and dangerous and destructive. An even greater source for the honor due to the language is the Torah's message that Hashem brought creation into being with speech. Hashem said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Later on, so much of the biblical narrative is directed by the words, and God spoke to Moses, saying, the rabbis of the Talmud gave their blessing to speech by considering, whoever gives charity to a poor person receives 6 blessings. One who consoles him with words is blessed with 11 blessings. There is a positive power inherent in speech. But the word also contains a menacing power. Speech is judged more powerful than the sword because a physical weapon can injure only those in proximity, while speech can kill at a distance. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. So much of the trouble in our lives and the trouble we cause others is rooted in our idle, accidental, or even destructive use of words. It is very important to become aware and take command of our tongues. The primary Mussar guidelines for speech is not whether something is true or not, but rather what impact our words will have. If our speech may cause people financial, physical, psychological, or other harm, or even anxiety or fear, then we are enjoined to hold our tongues. The practice of careful speech is called shmirat halashon, which literally means guarding the tongue. 4 main types of negative speech are identified for us. The first is degrading or negative statements spoken about a person that are actually true. Just because something is true doesn't mean we are free to say it. As in the example, you don't want to go to that party. The Hoffmans are so boring. The fact that the Hoffmans really are boring is no excuse for damaging their reputation in the eyes of others. When the negative statements are false, they are weighed more severely. It is a much more serious and damaging misuse of speech to say, you don't want to go to that party. The Hoffmans are so boring, when in fact the Hoffmans are the life of the party. Gossip is passing on to a person the negative things someone else has said. That would be like telling the Hoffmans that you had heard they were boring. Think of the hurt and the damage to relationships that would come from that wagging of the tongue. Finally, we need to guard against making statements that don't come right out with negativity, but only imply it. This is a pretty popular one in this day and age. Here we might say, considering that they never went to university, you think the Hoffmans would be more boring than they are. This is still negative and harmful speech in the guise of saying something faintly positive. All these sorts of speech are forbidden by Jewish law and tradition. We are forbidden to say these negative things, and we are forbidden to listen to them. I regularly conduct students in an exercise in which I pair people up and direct them to relate to their partner. One instance in the last week when they said something to someone or heard something from someone that reflected negatively on another person who was absent. The point is not to assess whether or not the facts in the conversation were true, but simply whether derogatory, potentially damaging speaking took place in your presence. I have done this exercise dozens of times, and to date, not a single person has failed to come up with at least one instance of wrong speech in which they participated. This remarkable 100% record proves true what the sages said. Only a minority of people may commit sexual offenses, while most people sin in matters of theft, yet everybody transgresses with the tongue. And so our sages screeched like cranes about the promiscuous use of lips and ears. Maimonides warns us that wrong speech is a transgression that is equivalent to murder, but more heinous because it kills 3 people: the one who said it, the one who heard it, and the one whom about it was said. He established the law. Silence is a protective fence for wisdom. Therefore, one should not be hasty in answering, and one should not speak excessively. One should teach one's students calmly and with satisfaction, without shouting and without being verbose. Solomon said, the words of wise men heard in quiet are better. On this passage of the Rambam, Rabbi Shlomo Wolb commented, It is wonderful how true speech actually grows from the midst of silence. Damaging speech, in contrast, is a sin that sullies our souls. The Vilna Gaon in his Mussar letter is empathetic on the need to guard ourselves from this sort of transgression. Our sages said that all man's observance of the commandments and teachings are not enough to counterbalance what comes out of his mouth. What should be man's pursuit in this world? He should be silent. One must seal his lips as tight as two millstones. Giving even greater weight to our need for caution is the sage's warning that the consequences of wrong speech last for eternity. Everyone is called to give a reckoning after death, at which time even the incidental conversations between a man and his wife are reported. They said, at the time of judgment in the world of truth, it is reported to a person how far the power of his frivolous speech reached that he spoke when he was in this world. Murder, idolatry, and idol worship are sins that cause a person to forfeit his or her portion in the eternal world. And evil speech is equivalent to all three. Whoa. There is a story. Come on, you. There is a story told about Rabbi Itzel Peterburger and his friend, the great Talmud scholar Rabbi Chaim Berlin. When both men were elderly, they made an agreement that whichever one of them died first would come back and visit the other to report on what death and the hereafter were like. Rabbi Itzel passed away first, and after a few days he came to his friend in a dream. Well, asked Rabbi Berlin, what has it been like? Rabbi Itzel replied, the profundity of the divine judgment is immeasurable. The sins of the tongue are the worst of all. If transgressions of speech are weighed so heavily, so must the proper use of the tongue be rewarded. There is a story that tells us this is so. Rabbi Elihu Davidus, a leading Kabbalist of the 16th century, tells of the righteous Rabbi Lapidot of blessed memory who dreamed of the Torah sage Rabbi Yehuda ben Shoshan. Rabbi Yehuda appeared to him in his dream with a face gleaming like sunlight and each hair of his beard like a torch. Like Rabbi Lapidot asked Rabbi Yehuda how he merited this transformation. The latter answered that it was due to the extent to which he kept silent, for he had never engaged in an empty conversation in his life. Silence is pregnant. Minding what we say highlights one important facet of the sole trait of silence. But there are others as well. Silence has much more to offer us. Beyond mastery of our speech is the act of quieting down itself, stepping back from a life saturated with sounds, many of them of our own making. Silence is a pregnant state out of which can emerge worlds of possibility we have no hope of knowing, so long as our lives are overfilled with words and noise. Certain sorts of insights and understandings about life and about my life don't ever come to me by talking or even by thinking, but are the gifts of silence. It's only by entering silence that I can find my way to prayer. So it was with the men of the great assembly who would sit for an hour in silence before they began their prayer. It is only in silence that the million concerns of my day become quieted enough that I can reach out to God. Wow, that's a huge statement. It is only in the silence that the million concerns of my day become quieted enough that I can reach out to Hashem. Otherwise, I am just too busy and distracted. Happens to all of us, doesn't it? People today can live their entire lives without a moment's peace. We are so used to living with all the spaces filled by noise that quiet can seem threatening. A lull in the conversation feels intolerable. To have nothing to say is a kind of failure, some people think. Yet the soul needs silence as the body needs sleep. Think about it. Wow. See, sleep to refresh, silence to cleanse. Gee, what a way to look at it. Sleep to dream, silence to awaken to the deeply real. The Talmud points to this in saying, there is no better medicine than silence. Wow. In Jewish tradition, wisdom consists in penetrating the superficial layers of reality to perceive the essence of things. And I have found that silence is essential to making that happen. Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gabriel says, in seeking wisdom, the first step is silence. Rabbi Akiva has told us silence erects a protective fence around the wisdom you already possess. It may be because our inner quiet is a route to Hashem and wisdom that the Talmud places such a high value on silence. A word is valuated for one selah or a coin, but silence for two selahs. Remember that the Talmud is a collection of many words reflecting on the words that came before and appreciating how highly the rabbis of the Talmud valued words makes their assessment of silence that much more remarkable. Like speech, silence also has its shadow side. There are those whose voices have been taken away or who turn their heads aside and remain silent, or who are so battered that no words are possible. Those are different situations, all reflective of an unhealthy silence. I've never had that problem. Too vocal, if anything. The Mussar masters are referring to a silence that is life-giving, not death-dealing, entered voluntarily in a pursuit of spiritual insight and wisdom. This is contemplative silence taken on voluntarily as a spiritual practice. A soul deprived of silence loses track of itself. It is afflicted. Sooner or later, it will, in desperation, seek its need or capitulate to negative forces. Practicing silence. Contemplative silence is practiced. The Mussar guidance for working on any soul trait is that the first stage of practice involves developing sensitivity. And so we focus our attention on the place of silence in our lives. We can expect to become suddenly and very sensitive to the reality that our lives are filled to the brim with noise. Paying attention to this aspect of our lives awakens us from the habitual numbness to the racket that pervades our days. Joggers have their portable music. People ride the subway with boomboxes. Cars rumble with thundering bass lines. There's a soundtrack playing to accompany your visit to the doctor or dentist, your elevator ride, or even your wait on the telephone, because all operators are currently busy helping other customers. Jets roar overhead. Television's commercials screech. The second stage of Mussar practice involves restraint. Our new awareness calls out for active steps to change the circumstances of our lives. Once we realize how rarely the moments of real silence occur in our days, we can restrain the input and the output of noise that swirls around us. We do have a choice. Limitation on speaking is built into Jewish liturgical practice in the Amidah, the silent prayer that is the central feature of the thrice daily prayer service. Of course, you would have to be making a regular practice of participating in the prayer service for this locus of silence to become a feature of your life. But even then, although this prayer may have been inspired, at least in part by a recognition of the soul's need for silence, as it is now practiced, the Amidah is still filled with words, though these are recited silently to oneself. The medieval Kabbalists introduced what they called Som Shitika, a fast of silence. We ordinarily think of a fast as a time of abstaining from food, like we do on Yom Kippur. In a Som Shitika, people refrain not from eating, but from speaking. Wow. Consider making your own fast of silence. At first, you may find it too radical to cut out speech entirely, but it is enough to start by designating a day on which you simply will have no radio, no television, no CDs, no videos, no input of sound of any kind over which you have control. Try it and observe for yourself what effect limiting noise on you has on you. Rabbi Wolb, a recent Mussar master, defines Mussar as building an interior life. Take on this exercise and see what silence does for that enterprise. Spending 10 or 15 minutes just sitting quietly once or twice a day will change your life. This focused concentration will spill over into all areas of your life and generate peace, creativity, and inner healing. Whether it is the silent prayer in the liturgy or in a fast of silence or meditation, even though our lips may be closed so that no sound emerges, we still might not yet know quiet. That's because, in its essence, silence is not merely an absence of external noise, it is also an inner state that goes beyond quiet to stillness. Often the noisiest thing in my life is not a jet engine or a loud conversation, but my mind itself. Oh, how is that so often true? Hitboatidude. This is a beautiful concept. This chapter began with the story of the 2 years the altar of Novardok spent in seclusion when he embarked on his spiritual path. Later in his life, he sought solitude in an isolated hut in the heart of a thick forest. He lived in that hut for 9 years and would receive his students and visitors there. Years later, it was discovered that he had built a little hut even deeper in the forest where he sequestered himself for periods of time. The sort of withdrawal the altar practiced is called Hitboatidude, a term that denotes the process of isolating the soul from all external stimuli. The practice of Hitboatidude draws us into the experience of silence in the service of wisdom. Our world, and maybe even more important in Jewish life today, is choked with words, filled with noise, and committed to drawing people into connection. So much so that it is almost a revelation to discover that tradition gives such an important place to the practice of solitude. The soul needs contemplative solitude in order to digest learning and experience and convert it into wisdom. This is so important. The altar did not invent Hitboatidude. One of the greatest Kabbalists, Rabbi Chaim Vital, wrote about Hitboatidude, saying, one must seclude himself, or Hitboatidude, in his thoughts to emulate the ultimate degree. The more one separates himself from the physical, the greater will be his enlightenment. Even earlier in the 12th century, Rabbi Abraham, son of the famous sage Maimonides, wrote a chapter called On Contemplative Seclusion, in which he said, Hitboatidude is one of the most honorable of the exalted qualities, and it is the path of the greatest of the righteous and the means by which the prophets attained revelation. It may be subdivided into external and internal Hitboatidude. The purpose of external is the attainment of the internal, which is the highest rung on the ladder of revelation. Wow. In fact, it is nothing less than revelation itself. Very important stuff, folks. This level may be attained by the annihilation of the activity of that part of the soul that senses entirely or mostly, and distancing oneself from that part that drives one in other worldly matters, inclining towards Hashem. In the 18th century, Hitboatidude was the central practice of the Hasidic master Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, and continues among his present-day followers, the Breslover Hasidim. Their practice of seclusion adds an active element in that their method involves seeking out a private corner at home or out in a park or in a field or woods where you pour out all of your needs and feelings to Hashem, crying, weeping, laughing, singing. Rabbi Nachman emphasized the value and importance of Hitboatidude as a simple practice applicable to all people, men, women, and children, each on his or her own level. He wrote, you must pour out your thoughts and troubles to Hashem like a child complaining and pestering his father. You must pray for everything. If your garment is torn and must be replaced, pray to God for a new one. Make it a habit to pray for all your needs, large or small, and especially for fundamentals, that God should help you attach yourself to him. You can meditate in thought, but most important thing is to express your thoughts in speech. In essence, though Hitboatidude means simply withdrawing and uncoupling from the ordinary connection and stimulus that fill our days, once we have opened that fresh space in our lives, some people will find their hearts bubbling over with things they want to say to Hashem, while others will just savor the silence and the time to reflect. Everyone will draw their own deep value from a period of retreat that Hitboatidude inserts into our lives. In Tomer Devorah, which is a course I'm going to be doing with Rabbi Aaron David Poston soon, Rabbi Moshe Cordero says that a person should seek out communion in solitude with his Creator in order to increase and perfect his wisdom. He echoes the words spoken 400 years ago by Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gabriel, who points to silence as the first step towards wisdom. When Rabbi Pur built his new yeshiva building in Far Rockaway, New York, he built a hardly noticeable and seemingly inaccessible little room right atop the flat roof for practicing Hitboatidude. I heard him once say in a class, "When are you living? Tell me, will you live when you have those rare moments of quiet? It's important to be able to be silent. It's important to let thoughts go in, because when you are quiet, a lot of things that will come into your mind will come not from your mind, but min ha-shamayim, from heaven. You grow from that. You become a different person from that." Important. Ask yourself, do I allow myself enough or any time when I consciously release the connections that bind me to my life and that sustain me in all my existing perspectives and perceptions of life? Isn't it true that sometimes even our whole holiday time is planned to be just full of noise and activity as ordinary life? And I've seen people plan holidays to the point where they're more work, and maybe even more so. Is it possible for me to make space to pull back just for a limited period of time, to take a fresh look and give my soul the time and space it needs to digest and integrate my experience and learning, even to get quiet enough maybe to hear the gentle rustling voice of the divine? If you are like me, it is a challenge to find time to practice this in modern lifestyle that intrudes on our inner lives so forcefully. But perhaps it increases your motivation to make time for such, to know that voices from tradition, like the ones I have cited from the 11th through the 21st centuries, all tell us the very same thing, which is that if we do practice withdrawal, the fruit of our silence and seclusion will be wisdom, the still small voice. Elijah the prophet had a vision. He was told, "Go out and stand at the mountain before Hashem, and behold, Hashem will pass in a great wind, breaking mountains and shattering rocks before God. God will not be in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake will follow, but God will not be in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire will pass, but God is not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." The Hebrew reads literally a soft, gentle rustling, the kind of voice that it would only be possible to hear in silence, both outer and inner. Can you hear the same voice in this poem, September on the Avenue, written in 1903 by Abraham Ben Yitzhak? Lights, dreaming, fading lights, at my feet are falling, soft shadows, failing shadows, stroke my path among the bare branches, the light wind sounds and ceases, and the last leaf flutters down, trembling a moment's more, and stillness. In seeking wisdom, the first step is silence, the second, listening, the third, remembering, the fourth, practicing, the fifth, teaching others. Interesting. And you know what? I think, we can end it there. I don't want to over push it or overstretch it, but we'll leave generosity for next week. but I hope that you got the benefits of silence. I mean, for me, it's something that I need to work on and integrate. And I live in a beautiful area where it should be easy to go find a nice, quiet, wooded region to be at rest and peace. But I mean, it just sounds like there's such benefit to calming the soul, calming the mind, and from silence. I love how he's brought out the benefits, but also the negatives of not speaking up when you need to. Yeah, it's just important. So, anyways, I'm not sure exactly what I'm scheduled this weekend. I know I still have Sunday's Genesis class with Rabbi Goldberg. I haven't heard back from, I believe I'm on with Rabbi Kaufman on Saturday as well. We're going to start chapter 2, Mishnah 9, in Pirkei Avos class. Possibly be on with Rabbi Carmi Ingber again with the Nativ friends. Exciting. Always good to have a wonderful rabbi sharing the depth of Torah. And we wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. So we're going to sign out for Rocky Mountain Readings now. But please, we'll be back Tuesday with more of Everyday Holiness. Keep me in your prayers. I got a long weekend of work to do as well. And yeah. So have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful weekend, everybody. Bye for now.